Welcome everybody. This is the thesis defense by Thomas Paul Taylor. My name is Henning Døye Andersen. I'm professor at DTU Management Institute. I'm the chairman of this event, and we are here with our examiners, and it is our pleasure to welcome the examiners at the event. And the examiners are our Associate Professor Joseph Onan, Professor Ben Hicks of Bristol University, and Professor Alison McKay from Leeds University. What's going to happen here now is that our candidate will give a lecture of 45 minutes, then we'll have a 15-minute break, and then at 2 o'clock we'll have the questions by the examiners and the answers by Thomas Taylor. We are also allowed to have questions from the audience, and if one of you or several of you would like to have questions to the candidate, you should announce that to me before the end of the break. The title of Thomas Paul Taylor's thesis is Performance Measurement in Global Product Development, the Selection and Application of Key Performance Indicators. Tom has done his thesis work in the department in which you are now here, the Institute of Management Engineering, under the supervision of Professor Saima Ahmed. As mentioned, you are entitled to ask the questions to the candidate after the lecture, and as I mentioned, if there are any questions from any person in the audience, you must report this to me by the end of the break. You are welcome to continue now with your lecture.
Thank you, Henning. Okay, so hello and welcome to the presentation of my PhD project, and I'll be talking for the next 45 minutes, as Henning said, with the project entitled Performance Measurement in Global Product Development, the Selection and Application of Key Performance Indicators. And the thesis has been written at the Management Engineering Division and is co-funded by the Danish Industry Foundation. So the presentation will begin with an introduction to the project and a review of the relevant literature. And following this, the research methods employed and the empirical studies conducted will be presented, and the implications to both research and industry will be outlined. So the project is part of a larger global product development project where research has been conducted in close collaboration with over 50 Danish companies. However, the specific companies in this project will not be named throughout the presentation. So as part of the larger project, there was 3 project lines. So the first, joint innovation, which focuses on the development of agile processes, and also decision making and performance measurement, which is where we come in. And a focus on the project was to develop an understanding of the current practice and also develop practical tools to support industry. So what is global product development? So advancements in communication technology and the opportunity to reduce costs and also be closer to global markets has resulted in companies increasingly moving business functions such as research and development, previously owned in-house by Denmark, for example, to overseas low-cost regions. And this is often done on a strategic level by outsourcing, and outsourcing is moving a task and function to a facility which is owned by another company, often a local company to a low-cost region, or by offshoring, which is moving a task or function to a facility actually owned by, for example, a Danish company to a low-cost region. And this results in the global product development, which typically consists of projects which is managing globally dispersed and culturally diverse engineering teams. And this is where we focus, and we focus on the impacts that this has on product development. So in this project, why performance measurement? So we identified a need from industry from a previous project with over 40 Danish companies to measure the impacts that global product development product has. And from literature, we see that there's a need for the development of actual practical tools that support decision-making in global product development, and performance measurement has been described as a practical tool to support this. However, there's a lack of research currently of performance measurement in this global context. So this brings us to the main project's aim, which was to develop an understanding of the key factors impacting success and the current practice for performance measurement in global product development projects. And with this understanding, we see that we can provide the basis for the development of a method to support performance measurement in global product development projects. So when looking at the transition from conventional to global product development, we see typically in conventional product development, these consist of co-located or cross-functional teams that typically rely on face-to-face communication, whereas global product development relates to culturally diverse and geographically dispersed engineering teams that are heavily reliant on online communication and also digitalized product development processes. So in this project, we defined global product development as the globalization of tasks and activities throughout the product development process, which can involve stages from the early concept development stage through to the final testing before production. So looking at the key motivations and challenges for GPD, here we identify in many, particularly in Danish companies, they look to globalize product development in order to reduce development costs, or also to access new resources, for example, and be closer to the global markets. However, as a result, we see a number of challenges that have been observed in case studies in industry in relation to cultural differences between managing the dispersed teams, or poor documentation, or creating a common vision within the team. And actually what we've seen from the case studies in literature is that there's been observed to be a learning by doing approach to global product development, and many of the solutions to these problems are actually implemented on an as-needed basis. So to manage the impacts on GPD, there's the global decision-making framework which was developed to support companies to actually implement the global product development process. And at these three stages, so the operational planning, so what should we outsource, what should we offshore, and then also the implementation of this, and then evaluating the success of global product development, there's been identified a need for the development and monitoring of key performance indicators to measure performance and to support the avoidance of some of these problems that we identified previously. So key performance indicators are defined as key performance quantifiable metrics that help an organization measure the success of critical factors. And we see that there's two types in the business or the management literature which categorize KPIs according to those that are lagging. So they measure the output of past activity and typically consist of financial indicators and actually provide a retrospective look on performance. And then there's leading KPIs, which measure activities that impact future performance and actually drive performance and are more predictive in nature and allow for corrective action along the process. So here an example is if we take the product development process, there's typically an outcome, often the product, and a lagging KPI would typically focus on measuring this outcome. However, what we see with leading indicators is they are more predictive in nature and they might measure the current project and actually allow for the course of action to be changed and more preventative in nature. And what we've seen in the literature is in conventional product development is many of these indicators actually have been focused on results, so we're more lagging in nature. So there's different ways of evaluating success of projects. So one is the macro level success, which focuses on the more long-term gains and are typically measured usually by the top level management. But then also there's the micro level success, which is more where we focus, which is at the project level and relates to was the project on time, within budget and according to the specifications. And in relation to this is similar to those identified in the project management literature when talking about the iron triangle. So here there's three performance dimensions. One is time, cost, and then also quality. And these are traditional performance dimensions highlighted in project management literature, also similar to those in conventional product development. However, these have been described as more static in nature and actually neglect the dynamics of product development projects. And there's been identified a need for additional indicators that monitor factors that impact the success along the process and hence allow for corrective action. So to support the development of KPIs, Kaplan and Norton developed the Balanced Scorecard, and this consists of 4 performance dimensions. The first, financial, so how do we look to the stakeholders? Customer, so how do the customers see us? Internal, so what must we excel at the company? And then learning and growth, so how can we continue to improve and create value? However, the framework was criticised as it did little to support the actual implementation and operationalisation of the KPIs. So as a result, Neely developed the performance measure record sheet. And this focuses more on the individual KPIs in defining the purpose for the KPI, the main formula to how to measure, and also who measures and so on. However, after a review of literature from the product development field and also the management field, we found that many of the actual processes for supporting the development of KPIs focused on these business processes in general, and there was a lack of studies in the context of global product development. So in conclusion, we reviewed these 2 fields, so global product development and also performance measurement, and we conclude that there's a learning by doing approach and there's a lack of understanding of some of these impacts that influence success at the project level, and there's a need identified to support the avoidance of problems as they arise by implementing key performance indicators. And also there's a lack of studies in GPD at the project level when the focus mainly is on the business processes in general. And there's a need for additional KPIs that monitor these factors impacting success along the process rather than simply those that go by the iron triangle. Also, understanding the impacts can support the development of these precautionary measures and hence lead to leading KPIs. So this brings us back to the main project aim, which was to develop this understanding of the key factors and also the current practice of performance measurements in GPD projects. And now I'll just run through the individual research questions and objectives for these that were developed as a result of the literature review. So first we looked to understand what the current practice for measuring performance in GPD projects was. And to do this, we wanted to understand also the coherence with the current KPIs in GPD, with current challenges and motivations in GPD. And then we wanted to understand how the KPIs were used to monitor factors influencing success in GPD projects. So here we wanted to identify the key factors impacting success at the project level and investigate KPIs for the avoidance of problems, so how the KPIs are used in GPD projects, and also to develop an understanding towards the practice for selecting KPIs. And then based on this, we wanted to look at how to develop a support method to actually support the selection of KPIs and provide project management with information and feedback on performance. And then we looked at the main objective here was to develop a method to support the identification of these key factors and then the selection of and documentation of KPIs. And finally, we wanted to then look at how the proposed support method actually supported the process of selecting KPIs and then to evaluate this support method in industry. So the overall research design was selected based on the design research methodology by Blessing and Chakrabarty, and the DRM was selected because we first wanted to go and understand the current practice in industry in relation to the performance measurement and the impact factors. Then based on this, we wanted to develop a framework to support these findings and then also to evaluate the impacts of this in industry. And the 4 stages in the DRM provided this as a framework to do this study. So first, the research clarification was the main results from the literature review, where we formulated goals to investigate the factors impacting success and KPIs in GPD. And then second, at the descriptive study, we conducted first study 1, the exploratory study, which involved 2 surveys with 44 Danish manufacturing companies. And then study 2, which went more in depth with some case studies with 2 large Danish manufacturing companies. And then we wanted, based on these findings, at the prescriptive study, was to develop a support tool that supports the selection of KPIs. And finally, in a third case, so the third study in this research project was to then evaluate the impact of the KPI toolkit in industry. So first, the exploratory study, where the main objective was to understand the coherence of KPIs in GPD with the main challenges and motivations in global product development. So we conducted 2 surveys with 44 Danish manufacturing and engineering companies that currently globalize parts of the product development process. And the first survey was distributed online to 100 Danish companies, which were based on companies that we built up for a previous network. And survey 2 was actually conducted at a workshop that focused on performance measurement in global product development here at DTU. And the majority of companies were actually large companies, but there was also some small and medium. And the participants from the companies ranged from senior to middle management level. So here, these are the 2 surveys, which included several sections. And the main sections from survey 1 first was to identify the key motivations for global product development, and then to ask participants to select the key performance indicators they use in global product development. And then based on this, we developed survey 2, where we also include the motivations and KPIs, but we find it important to include the challenge-orientated approach based on the idea of having to identify these key problems along the process and select KPIs accordingly. So a coding scheme was developed to analyze this data, which was based on key themes in the literature and also data. So for example, some of the motivations and challenges were actually used from those identified in literature where possible. However, some of the data, for example, with the key performance indicators in the context of GPD, were not so available in literature, and therefore additional codes were developed before that. So the data was categorized according to this, and then counted for frequency of occurrence to highlight key patterns in the data. So first, from the survey 1 and survey 2, we investigate the key motivations in order to understand how KPIs relate to these. And what we see from survey 1 and survey 2 is some of the key motivations was to reduce costs and also to access new resources. And this is also common in the literature we found. And actually, many of the categories that we identified were those taken from literature without the need to identify further categories. So here we can see that this implies that the research is beginning to mature here. So the KPIs related to the motivations, we have a large list from survey 1 and survey 2. And some of the main KPIs actually related to development cost, project lead time, and also customer satisfaction. So they were mentioned the most throughout the surveys. And these actually have been identified as important in these dimensions from the iron triangle, and are also key indicators for GPD projects. However, many of the KPIs, such as break-even time or return on investment, focus more on tangible outcomes of a process and have been described in lagging in nature, and therefore do not provide a company to implement corrective action along the process. And some of the key challenges in GPD. So this is from survey 2, where we asked participants to highlight what the key challenges in GPD were. And we see that communication and cultural differences, similar to the literature review, are very key in this global context. And many of the challenges actually stated were very similar to those in literature, and there was no additional categories required, which also shows that this area of research is beginning to mature with the challenges at the higher level. So the KPIs for actually monitoring the challenges, here you can see already there's fewer KPIs here, which implies that the companies actually experience difficulties with stating KPIs for measuring the more intangible factors. However, some of the KPIs, such as number of problems during the project or the frequency of communication problems, actually focus on the occurrence of process problems and hence are more leading in nature and allow for corrective action. So in conclusion, Study 1, we see the results from Study 1 identify KPIs in relation to key challenges and motivations in GPD. And we see that the key challenges at the strategic level and the motivations are actually maturing in this area of research. And the KPIs for the key challenges are actually focused more on the occurrence of project issues and setting up corrective action along the process and more leading in nature. So the findings support the advancement of knowledge regarding KPIs used for measuring performance in the global product development context. However, with this study, there was a lack of in-depth understanding towards and be able to investigate the selection and use of KPIs and the key factors impacting success in global product development at this project level. So based on this, we conducted study 2, which was multiple case studies, and we focused here with the research objective to identify the key factors impacting success at the project level and to investigate the KPIs used in GPD projects for the avoidance of problems, and also to understand the current practice for selecting KPIs. So the case studies, we conducted 2 in-depth case studies with 2 large Danish manufacturing companies with offshore research and development functions in India, China and Poland. And Company A focused in the refrigeration and air conditioning market and specialised in the production of large industrial valves. And as I say, they had an offshore R&D function set up in India with the motivation to primarily reduce costs and also to free up the time of the Danish engineers to work on more complex activities. And Company B focused in the medical device sector and specialised in the production of syringes and blood gas analyzers to be used in the hospital environment. And they recently established an offshore R&D departments in China and Poland with, again, the main motivation to reduce costs. So the multiple case studies, the design, we conducted 23 interviews with the global engineers and also the Danish engineers. And here we focused on the impacts in general as a result of the collaboration and also an in-depth understanding of the KPI selection process. And the interviews were audio recorded and transcribed and where possible conducted face-to-face, but we weren't able to travel to India or Poland, so these were conducted online. The observations, there was 34 non-participatory observations conducted, and these focused on 3 global product development projects at Company A and Company B. And here we look to investigate some of the key factors impacting success at the project level and also address the issue of using the KPIs in these projects. And the observations, we kept detailed notes because it was not possible to audio record the observations. And also, again, we conducted the majority of these online and face-to-face where possible. Furthermore, we analysed company procedures, such as the risk assessments and key project metrics at the company in order to further validate the results. So the design of the study and the analysis, actually, we developed a predefined coding scheme based on the literature. However, where literature did not exist, codes were added to the scheme to avoid the confinement of data. So for example, for the motivations and challenges, many of these at the high level that were identified in literature, we used codes from these. However, for performance measurement, where less has been reported in this global context, additional codes were developed based on the data. So the transcripts and field notes, or the transcripts for the interviews and the field notes from observations were then categorized according to the key themes and subcodes, and the frequency of codes and code co-occurrence was analysed to highlight the patterns in the data. So first, the interviews gave us the understanding in general towards some of the key challenges since the collaboration had begun. And what we saw, again, similar to the 2 surveys, was that communication and cultural differences were some of the issues actually with the collaboration on a high level. And the cultural differences related more, for example, with the Indian engineers and at the global R&D, this related to them wanting to work more strictly towards guidelines. And the Danish engineers were working more freely in their work, and the level of autonomy was slightly different here. With communication, it related often to a lack of clear specifications being provided by the Danish engineers to the global engineers. However, the challenges here were relatively high level, and what we needed to do is conduct observations in order to investigate some of the key impact factors at the project level. So what we did is we investigated, or we conducted observations of 3 global product development projects, which allowed us to analyse this key cause-effect relationships of some of the factors impacting success over time. So at Company A, we observed a global product development project involving the Danish and Indian engineers. And what we saw as a result of some of the difficulties they'd experienced before is they actually felt that the level of project uncertainty here was high and there was a risk of project failure. So therefore they increased the level of project governance in order to reduce the risk of project failure. And to do this, they introduced the Indian engineers to a project where the solution was already known from the outset in order to control the level of innovation. So this reduced the innovative freedom of the skilled engineers actually in India and also reduced the complexity of tasks, which in turn resulted in a misalignment of interests and design rework and eventual project time delays. So what we saw is the Indian engineers were very ambitious towards the project and wanted to generate a large number of concepts that would impact future projects, whereas the Danish engineers tried to keep their ambitions level low. So at Company B, we investigated two GPD projects with Danish and Chinese engineers and also Danish and Polish engineers. And we saw similar challenges from the outset with cultural differences in communication at Company B with the collaboration. However, what we saw is they approached the project by segregating the tasks in the product development process into manageable work packages that could be worked on autonomously, and also they were able to co-locate some of the global R&D engineers at crucial times in the project. So this increased the adherence to the product development process and also the cohesiveness of the tasks that were completed in the team. And furthermore, it actually reduced the workload of the project manager when managing this project. So when looking more from the observations in the GPD projects with the lagging KPIs, what we saw at Company A was they followed this stage gate product development process. And when finding out about the number of concepts that were produced by the Indian team, this was only found out at the end of the concept development process when actually including internal design feedback from the company. So this actually provided insufficient information to avoid the misalignment of interests and project time delays, and what could have been done is to measure this at an earlier stage in the project. However, this understanding can then be used to impact future projects at the company. At Company B, however, what we saw is that this is again the product development process, and it's a similar stage gate process, and we saw that they actually identified an issue in the project as being poor documentation and the accessibility of documentation. So what they did is they developed a KPI actually to monitor the availability of documentation throughout the project. And this impacted the current projects, and then they used the lagging KPI to monitor the project lead time to see how this impacted the timing of the project and avoided missed deadlines, for example. So here the key factor impacting success was identified and a precautionary measure was implemented to avoid these deviations along the process. So the selection process, the interviews provided the understanding towards this at the companies. So at Company A, we see that KPIs were actually selected according to the design requirements in the product development process. And the project team was not involved, so it was only the project manager that selected these KPIs. And many of the KPIs related to budgetary requirements, also project schedules and product quality. So those also similar identified from the iron triangle, for example. Company B, actually what we saw was that they use a 2-hour workshop for the selection of KPIs with the project team. However, this was typically done in a brainstorming activity, which has been criticised in literature as it can cause confusion towards the purpose of what the KPIs are actually measuring. And this was the case in Company B. So when we look at the KPIs from the two studies, so we identified a large number of KPIs, and it was possible to group these along higher performance dimensions. So first, product development time. Those related to this are such as product lead time and also break-even time. And then we've got product development costs, such as return on investment and margin goals, and these are more generalizable across projects. And then we have the higher customer-based metrics, which focus on measuring the market position and also the market share. And then more specific project-related KPIs, which we observed during the GPD project, such as availability of documentation, and then the capability for the supplier to deliver on time, for example. And then using the learning and growth dimension from the balanced scorecard, we see that these indicators actually relate more to measuring the impact overall on success of global product development at a high level. And these can relate to leads to future operations or a number of new alliances. So the 3 dimensions here, product development time, costs, and project specific. The KPIs related here, we can see are perhaps more useful for project managers, whereas at the customer base and learning and growth level, these are more high-level KPIs that are more useful for top-level management. However, in the studies, we identified that, especially in Company A, that the majority of these KPIs were used in a lagging way. So in conclusion, the results from Study 2 develop an understanding of the key factors impacting success in GPD and the selection and application of key performance indicators. And what we see is it's important to clearly define these modular interfaces and segregate the tasks in the product development process to allow for global teams to work autonomously. And also it's important to co-locate GPD teams during critical stages of the project and to balance this responsibility also with control over tasks. Furthermore, we saw a lack of leading KPIs in practice, particularly in Company A, despite their importance highlighted in literature. And also there was a lack of support for actually developing the KPIs at the project level. And what we see is that lagging KPIs do not provide the necessary feedback to avoid deviations in GPD, as shown from Company A. And also there's a need to support the development of these leading and lagging KPIs to support the avoidance of problems as they arise. So based on this, together with wanting to actually advance research, what we wanted to do, an ambition in this study, was for the project to impact industry. And based on the findings, a need was identified to develop a method to support the identification of key factors impacting success, and then support the selection and documentation of leading and lagging KPIs. So what we did, we developed the KPI selection toolkit, and this consists of a three-phase approach to support project managers to prepare, to stage and execute a KPI selection workshop in a company. And the first phase focuses on the theoretical concepts, so the differences between leading and lagging, for example. Also then the second phase provides a structured approach in the company to select KPIs. And then the phase 3 focuses on actually documenting the KPIs, where we develop a number of templates for this. And the key concepts within the selection toolkit, many were developed from the empirical data and also some from the literature, and we identify these throughout the following slides. So here at phase 2, the KPI selection process, this is the fundamental thinking behind supporting the selection of KPIs. So we identify 3 levels. There's the business level, project level, and task level. And here we focus on the project level performance measurement. And first, we see that it's important to identify the key challenges and motivations in GPD, and then to investigate how the key challenges actually influence the success towards achieving these motivations in GPD. And here we use some of the motivations and challenges identified in the studies and also from literature to help with this process. Then secondly, we identify key strategies to achieve some of the motivations or the goals, and also strategies to prevent or minimize the risk as a result of the challenges. And some of the strategies here are taken from the empirical studies, such as co-locating the GPD team in the early planning stages. And then based on this, we support the development of KPIs, and we provide a list of the KPIs identified in the studies, and use these as suggestions for measuring towards these motivations and challenges. And the final step is then to categorize them within these leading and lagging and to understand the relationship between these. So study 3, which was the main objective actually, was to evaluate the impact that this process has in a third industry case, an industry. So the study was conducted with a large Danish manufacturing company, which was selected on the interest in testing the toolkit. And this company focused on the marine and offshore sector and specialised in the production of ventilation and air handling systems for offshore rigs. And they wanted to test the KPI toolkit in a software development project. And the development project focused on creating a common platform for product development projects to be completed in the future. So to actually test and evaluate the toolkit, we conducted a half-day workshop with 6 key project team members from different functions within the company. And also to evaluate, we developed surveys that were conducted immediately before the workshop was implemented and also after the workshop was implemented. And then to evaluate the long-term impacts, we actually conducted interviews 6 months after the toolkit had been implemented with 2 key participants from the from the workshop. And we used the model developed by Kirkpatrick and extended by Armand Christensen, where we look at reaction learning results and the behavioural impacts, and also the validation factor in the evaluation. So here in this presentation, rather than focusing on the theoretical concepts and performance measurement, we'll focus on phase 2, which was the selection of KPIs and also the documentation. So first of all, it was important to identify the key influence factors at the company for this project, the development project. So what we use here is a method developed a long time back called the Fishbone method, and actually been extended by Kitcher et al. And has been used in outsourcing projects in general to measure the impacts. So first, on the left-hand side, we identify the key effects, so what is the desired outcome from the project, such as the key motivations, and then to identify some of the key causes, so some of the factors that can impact the success towards achieving this outcome. So what we saw at the company is they identified several motivations or desired effects, and the main one was actually to reduce costs in the project. And also we then went into identifying a number of key factors that could impact the success towards reducing costs. And they identified a lack of common vision within the internal project team and also external between departments as impacting the costs of the project. So based on this, to support the development of KPIs, also we identify key strategies in order to achieve the desired outcome and also to minimise the risk towards some of these causes. So an example here, at the internal level with the project team, they decided in order to reduce the risk of this lack of common vision, they decided to set up regular meetings with key project stakeholders throughout the project with a fixed agenda and then structured gathered feedback throughout the process. And then based on this strategy, they then developed the KPI to monitor the level of participation at the company during these projects from key stakeholders. And then following this, the KPIs were then mapped according to the product development process to highlight the frequency at which it should be measured. And then after this, what we do is move into the phase 3, which is documenting the KPI. So here we developed a KPI template, which was based on some of the key themes identified by Neely in the performance measure record sheet. And when filling this out, we identified the key impact factor, so this lack of common vision. And then they identified a strategy in order to reduce this lack of common vision, or the impact of this lack of common vision. And then they developed a leading KPI which would avoid this common or a lack of common vision in the project team and support creating this vision. And then they measured the actual impact this had on the project success in relation to product development time with the lagging KPI. So the results from the evaluation, we actually focused on the impact of the proposed support in supporting the process for selecting the KPIs or leading and lagging KPIs and the development of precautionary strategies. So what was done, we did the surveys and also the interviews here, and the workshop supported this. So here, from the survey results and the workshop, we identified that the KPI toolkit was useful and applicable within the actual environment it was implemented, and it increased the level of understanding within the team towards these key concepts, the leading and lagging KPIs. Also, we see that the results supported the actual selection process and documenting of purposeful leading and lagging KPIs. And here we compared actually the results of the KPIs back to key characteristics for selecting KPIs by Neely. Furthermore, for validating, we identified that there was a need to increase the time of the KPI toolkit when completing the documentation of the KPI template to further validate the toolkit. And then finally, the interviews provided the insights to investigate the impact that the KPI toolkit had on the behaviour at the company. And we found that the process actually supported in creating a common vision, which is a key challenge in GPD projects. And also it supported the process of documenting the KPIs and enabled key knowledge to be transferred to future projects. Also, it increased the commitment towards using the leading and lagging KPIs in the company. So in conclusion, from study 3, the results of the study developed the KPI toolkit and evaluated the impact in industry. And the evaluation based on the requirements demonstrated that the KPI toolkit supports identifying key impact factors and also the development of preventative strategies to avoid some of the challenges. And also it supported the selection and documentation of leading and lagging KPIs, and furthermore supported the alignment of interests within the project team. So the KPI toolkit introduces a shift from this traditional goal-orientated approach to performance measurement by including a challenge-orientated approach to the selection of KPIs. And also we see that the process is not just valuable for selecting KPIs, but it's also a valuable process to identify key factors and create this common vision within the team from the outset. So in conclusion, we see that our study is one of very few research studies that's conducted in this industry setting that focus on real engineering design activities in a global context. Data was collected from a total of 47 companies through the following 3 studies. So study 1 focused on 2 surveys with 44 Danish companies. And then during study 2, we were lucky to actually have insights during real global product development projects with 2 industry cases. And we conducted interviews, observations, and also analysed the documents and procedures at the company. And then study 3 was conducted with a 3rd company case, and actually we conducted a workshop, surveys, and also interviews at the company to evaluate the impact of the proposed support. So when highlighting the contributions to research, we see a key area for the KPIs for global product development. So we advanced the understanding of KPIs applied in GPD at the project level, and this builds on studies actually that focus in the conventional or local product development environment. Also, this challenge-oriented approach introduces the concept of KPIs for minimizing risks of the key challenges, rather than focusing just on the achievement of goals alone. Also, identifying the key impact factors, we advance understanding towards the factors impacting the success in GPD at the project level, which actually provides the basis for researchers to develop precautionary strategies. Also, the coding scheme, we see that this can be used in future studies to guide if there's investigations towards the performance measurement in global product development. And then to industry, what we see, again, the key impact factors, identifying these and understanding the key cause-effect relationships actually allows to inform practitioners of where along the process that precautionary strategies need developing in GPD projects. Also the KPIs for GPD, so identifying the KPIs and grouping them according to performance dimensions supports practitioners with implementing and developing KPIs for GPD projects. Also the selection of KPIs, so we developed this understanding of leading and lagging KPIs, and it increased as a result of the KPI selection toolkit in the company case, and actually was used in future projects as we found out through the interviews. The toolkit further supports the development of precautionary strategies to minimise risk, as I say, rather than just a toolkit to support the selection of KPIs. So we see future research, there's an opportunity for, or there's a need for further longitudinal studies of actually identify and observe the GPD process along the stages of product development and identify the key cause-effect relationships of these key factors impacting success, and hence build up a depository of knowledge to support the precautionary strategies. Also, a comparative study for conventional product development will be useful, so to identify the selection process in co-located product development, and also to look at how they're used in co-located product development, and then to compare this with global product development. And furthermore, there's a need to further validate the KPI selection toolkit in GPD projects specifically. And then it would be interesting to actually investigate the long-term impact of these KPIs on performance. And finally, we plan to develop a practical toolkit, or a practical support guide, in order to support the implementation in the KPI toolkit in industry. So first of all, thank you all for listening today, and special thanks to the committee for making the effort to come over and for reading the theses, and also to the Danish Industry Foundation for their support and funding during the project, the industrial participants for their key insights to the study, the Global Product Development team for their interesting conversations throughout the project, and then finally to my supervisor, Professor Saima Arma Christensen. Thank you.